Well, welcome everyone. We've got, I think there's 8 or 10 of you so far. There's probably a couple more still to arrive, but I think we'll make a start anyway. Just we've got an hour and a fair bit to cover, so I think we probably should just launch into it. We'll make the recording available so anyone who's arriving late can catch up, or for those of you that want a refresher, you can catch up as well. Let's get underway then, shall we? Firstly, welcome to the Ākina's Introduction to Starting a Social Enterprise. So this is a webinar that is a workshop we often do around the first steps for thinking about what a social enterprise is and how to start one. A few introductions to begin with. So my name is Rowan Yeoman. I am a venture manager with the Akina Foundation. I spent a lot of time working with startups and startup social enterprises, and really interested in the innovation space in business models and how business can evolve to be something that creates positive change in our society. So today we'll talk a bit about business models, and hopefully you'll be as passionate as I am by the end of it. That's me looking seriously out into space.
Hi everyone. Yeah, hi, and I'm Lucia Diefil. I've been involved in the social enterprise space in New Zealand for the last 5 years or so, since when I came here from Spain, from where I'm from, and been with Ākina for the last few months, learning lots, meeting really cool people like you guys, and looking forward for this webinar and seeing what it brings for us.
Excellent, thank you. So, small introduction around from the Akina Foundation. So some of you will know who we are. Some of you might be watching this recording overseas and therefore have no idea who we are. So very quickly, the Akina Foundation started as the Hikurangi Foundation in 2008 and was rebranded to Ākina about a year ago. And that was really to reflect the expansion of our mission to be focused around social enterprise, the social enterprise ecosystem, and our role in helping it reach coherency and scale, helping it really find its feet in New Zealand. And so our role is to really do everything we can at lots of different levels in the ecosystem to support the growth of social enterprise. And so that's from grassroots workshops and webinars like this to structured programs and acceleration and incubation to consulting services to lobbying government to impact investment, the whole gamut. So we do lots and lots of things, and the goal being that as the ecosystem matures, there'll be less need for us to do all of those things. But while those needs are there, we're here to try and fill some of those spaces. Ākina is Māori for bold action, and it conveys a spirit of watchful encouragement, which is really what we're here to do, is to help encourage others to develop social enterprise into what it has the potential to be in New Zealand. Not to do it all ourselves, but to be supporters of all you good people out there that are doing good things. All right. So before we get underway, I'd love to just get a sense of who's there. Webinars are always a bit odd in that you can't necessarily see everybody, eyeball them. So I'd love if you could just pop into the chat sort of who you are, what your name is. Have you got an idea for a social enterprise? Have you started a social enterprise? Are you from a non-profit looking at social enterprise? Are you just curious about this whole social enterprise thing? And where are you? It's really useful for us to understand where the interest is around New Zealand. And so yeah, we'd love to know where you are in New Zealand or overseas to get a sense of where that interest is. And any burning questions that you've got. So anything that you'd really love to get an answer to during this webinar, and we'll endeavour to get an answer for that question, either in the content or at the end if we haven't managed to get to it. Okay, so just take a minute and chuck that in if you can, please. Need some elevator music.
Yeah, here we are. Can you all access the chat?
Has everyone managed to access the chat?
Yeah. Hi, Nancy. Thanks, Richard. Just here to find out about social enterprises and how they work. I have an idea to activate.
Excellent. All right. So if the rest of you could, oh yeah, we've got lots coming in now. Hi, Manib. Who's in Auckland? Excellent. Good stuff. Okay, team. Let's rock on. But thank you for that. So today's webinar, we've got an hour. Ask questions via the chat function. So if there's something that's not clear, punch it in. We'll sort of endeavor to sort of get some back and forth and understanding when we're hitting the mark or missing the mark, and what's clear and what's not clear. And then at the end, we're going to ask you for some feedback on this, because we want to be able to improve this and make it more valuable. So we're just going to ask for a few minutes of your time to fill in a feedback form. So I'm just telegraphing that so it's not a surprise. Awesome. So the outcomes for this morning's webinar, the goal is to help you gain an improved understanding of social enterprise and the models of social enterprise, what you might need to start a social enterprise, and what those first steps might be, with the intention of you feeling confident to be able to apply some learnings and have a bit of a sense of where to get help. So that's what we're aiming for. Let's hope we get there. So let's get started. So firstly, what is a social enterprise? And this is a somewhat thorny question, and it's a really interesting question as well. So we're going to unpack that a little bit, but I thought we'd start by just looking at a social enterprise. And I picked Patu Aotearoa. So Patu are an amazing social enterprise based in Camberley in the Hawke's Bay. And their goal is to get physical fitness and make it available for people living in outlying rural communities that may not have access to gyms and things like that. And they're really motivated by a desire to help specifically Māori and Pacifica people who are at risk of heart disease and diabetes, and to be able to create an opportunity for them to find really meaningful and valuable physical activity and really turn around a big problem. And so what they've done is they've created this local gym that can move. And so they've got an established brand for a workout called Patu, and they can show up in lots of different places to run the program. So personal trainers will go to marae, to local community centres, to parks, and they're basically breaking down the barriers for people to access this. They get some external funding to help reduce some of the costs, and have had some amazing results. And so it's a real opportunity a real example of a social enterprise that's providing a service that wouldn't otherwise be available to people, or affordable, or easy to access to solve a real problem. Okay, cool. So if we're thinking about what makes up a social enterprise, what the pieces are, one of the core things of a social enterprise is the enterprise bit. It's kind of given away in the title. And so a social enterprise has a viable commercial model within it. So some sort of commercial business engine that does some trading that is viable. And this operates in a way that delivers a social and environmental purpose. Some sort of commercial methods, and there's some social environmental purpose as the goal. This business model has the money flowing through it. So it has a way of earning money and then delivering goods and services in a sustainable way. and then the output of that is social impact. And so we'll get into a bit more of the detail around business models and impact models, but that's the sort of fundamentals of social enterprise. It has this economic engine, and the result is this social impact. And now, when it comes to actually defining social enterprise, so there's lots of debate and conversation around what actually is a social enterprise, and is my venture a social enterprise or is it not? And some people think it is and some people don't. We'd really understand social enterprise existing on a bit of a spectrum. So at the right-hand side, you've got fully for-profit business. At the left-hand side, you've got fully for-purpose charity. And then you've got all of this sort of grey area in between. And generally, no one is just one thing. For example, I think 40% of New Zealand's charitable income comes from trading. So most New Zealand, well, at least a lot of New Zealand charities still have some trading operations, even though they might be mostly donor funded or grant funded, but they'll do some trading quite often. And often businesses will have some sort of social giving, or some sort of way of giving back to the community. And as these kind of things move in towards the center of that diagram, the business starts to become more and more socially focused. The charity starts to rely more and more on trade income to sustain itself. It starts to kind of look like social enterprise. And that can take lots of different forms. And certainly in New Zealand, there isn't an official definition of social enterprise. Lots of countries have developed a definition of social enterprise, and that's primarily around putting some boundaries around a definition of social enterprise, because they're going to make available some funding or some tax benefits or something like that. So, for example, the UK's got an official government definition of social enterprise. That doesn't mean that that's what social enterprise is. It just means that that's how they've defined it for the purposes of, regulation. And so we often think of social enterprise as being more of a verb than a noun, more of a set of activities of applying business process and the business model to delivering a social or environmental purpose, rather than this is officially what it is.
Well, we have a question here from Janet. Janet is asking, what's the difference between social enterprise and CSR?
CSR? Corporate social
responsibility. Yeah.
So the difference being, and actually that brings us to our next slide. So thank you, Janet. This is perfect. So in terms of a working definition that we use for social enterprise in New Zealand at the Ākina Foundation, we say purpose and impact are primary and embedded. That social enterprises aim to generate the majority of their income from trade, that they reinvest the majority of their profits into their mission, and that they aim to be financially self-sustainable. So if you're thinking about corporate CSR, in the vast majority of cases, the social impact is not primary. It's not the reason that the corporation exists. It's a byproduct of the corporation existing. So the intentions may be really good, no doubt there. It's just that the company wasn't set up to have this, primarily for a social impact. It's more of a byproduct of it being a profitable company and being, and having a desire to do something worthwhile alongside making money for the shareholders. So just looking at that definition, purpose and impact are primary and embedded, which means that the reason for the social enterprise existing is the purpose and the impact that it has. And those things are embedded in the organization. So they're not just something that can be turned on and off depending on, somebody's desire. They are embedded in the organization, whereas corporate CSR, you could switch it off if, you had a lean year and you didn't have much money, or the wrong manager turned up, they could just pull the funding for that program and it just wouldn't exist anymore. So that, again, they aim to generate the majority of their income from trade, which is there's an intention there of being majority trade income. And that's what's different between, say, what we'd call a social enterprise and a charity that maybe gets $1 million in grant funding and sells $10,000 worth of T-shirts. So in that case, they're not majority of income from trade. So the flavor of the organization is not a trading organization. The flavor of the organization is a charity that's redistributing grant funding. And, you know, not everyone should, or everything should be social enterprise. Lots of things should be charities, and that's the most effective model. But if you're moving towards social enterprise, generally we see that you're moving towards that majority of income from trade. And reinvesting the majority of profits into mission, that's, again, something that people can debate. Some people would say all the profits have to go into the mission. Some would say none of them have to. And, you know, that's for enterprises to figure out for themselves as to what's the most effective way of doing what they're trying to do, bearing in mind that the purpose and impact are the primary reason for being there. And they aim to be financially self-sustaining, which is what we're all trying to get to with social enterprise. Cool. All right, so types of social enterprise, they tend to take lots of different forms, and we lump them in under one title. And here's a kind of handful of them that are worth calling out. So bottom left, we've got community enterprises, and these are quite often place-based enterprises that are based around a community group that has an immediate problem in their community that they want to solve, or an immediate piece of value that they want to create. And so quite often they're limited to the community. Often they're based around an asset or something like that they might have access to, or a piece of land or something that might be able to do something with. And quite often they come out of established community organizations. What we'd call social enterprise startups are brand new startup ventures. And these can be, they can potentially be high scale, like a Silicon Valley style startup where you test out a model and then make it really huge. And there's examples of social enterprise startups that have become really, really big, or they may not be that big, but they've got that kind of flavor of I'm starting something new, and it might be product or service based. Transitioning not-for-profits. And so we see a lot of not-for-profits that are realizing that there are other options than being on the grant funding treadmill, or the donation treadmill. The overheads for grant funding seem to just keep getting more and more onerous. And so a lot of not-for-profits are looking at how can we supplement our income, and then how can we actually get to a point where we're majority trade income. And quite often it comes from leveraging an asset that they already have, or a customer group that they already have, and figuring out a way of generating income from them that supports their core mission. And then finally, joint ventures. And these can be quite interesting. Often you'll see a joint venture between, say, a corporation, and it may be CSR funded, and maybe a non-profit, where they say, actually, together we're going to set up a separate entity. It's going to be a social enterprise, and it's going to do these things. And it just creates options. It creates options for the non-profit because they potentially don't have to take all of the risk of the thing failing. If they did it in-house and it failed, they could be liable for a whole bunch of expense, and it could wreck their organization. Likewise, it could create a whole bunch of negative press, and that would then affect their ability to get grant funding and things like that. So they're able to create a separate organization to run as a social enterprise. And likewise for the corporate, you know, they get to contribute to something that could potentially grow and be successful, but they don't have to develop it all in-house and all of that expense.
Paul, we have another question for Paul.
Sure.
Paul is asking, if you just have an idea and you want to see it grow, would you go for more of a startup model or a joint venture model?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it depends on the idea and who you are. So if you're a big nonprofit, then you might look down the joint venture route. Quite often, what we see even with social enterprise startups is that partnerships become really important. An example of this would be, we were working with an organization that was looking to train at-risk youth. And so they were, they had a design background, and what they wanted to do was train at-risk youth in design and give them a pathway to a career. But from their perspective, they didn't have experience working with at-risk youth, and they didn't have experience running training programs. And so for them, rather than trying to learn all of that capacity themselves for their social enterprise startup, the partnership, they partnered with a training provider that could take care of all of that side of things, and with an organization that worked with at-risk youth, so that they were able to test out the bit that they thought would be new and interesting and powerful, but they didn't have to develop all of that capacity themselves. So it could be a joint venture where it is a partnership between two established organizations, or it could be partnerships that you have as a startup. But it very much depends on what you're doing and what you need and where the risks are and what resources you have access to.
Cool, that makes sense.
Cool. All right, so we'll whip through a few examples of social enterprises, just to give you a bit of a sense of what we're talking about. First one being Embrace, which is a really neat venture that it started at a Stanford class in the US, and they were challenged to create a baby incubator that costs 1% of a regular baby incubator. And what they ended up designing was using this really clever fabric that keeps a universal temperature. It doesn't have hot spots and cold spots. So they developed a sleeping bag that operates as a baby incubator, and you put some special pads in a microwave and heat them up, and then slide them into the sleeping bag, and it will keep the baby at an even temperature. I think it's roughly $10,000 for a big incubator, and they managed to do this for something like $100, which is pretty incredible. But the model they set up was a social enterprise one, where they set up a trading company that would do the R&D, would sell the incubator to customers that could afford to pay for it. So it might be first world countries, medical providers in first world countries. It might be more wealthy medical providers in developing countries. And then the profits from this went to provide the incubator for free for communities that couldn't afford it. And so that's a sort of hybrid model, where they had a trading entity that was a for-profit company that was then owned by a charity that would then distribute the profits to the people that needed it. Next one, Te Whāngai Trust, and some of you might have had experience with Te Whāngai Trust. So they're based in the Waikato, and they work with long-term unemployed and young people who are at risk and struggling to find employment. And they provide a structured, safe working environment where people get ongoing mentorship and build life skills and prepare them for sort of good employment in the future. And the model works. They have a tree nursery and teams of people that go and plant trees on contract for the likes of Fonterra and New Zealand Steel. So they have commercial contracts with Fonterra and New Zealand Steel, and from the profits from that, they fund the extra cost of the sort of work programs and mentor programs for the people that are actually doing the work, with the intent that they graduate from that kind of work into paid employment, into other paid employment, so more people can come in to fill their spots. And finally, third one, the Red Cross shops. I think most of you will have familiarity with this model. Red Cross shop, or St. Vincent de Paul, or any one of a number of thrift shops. And so that model is basically taking clothing that people don't need anymore and selling it, often using volunteer staff behind the counter to lower costs, and then the profits from that going to pay for the mission of the Red Cross. It's a revenue generating operation for the Red Cross. And that brings us to what we refer to as the three buckets for social enterprise. And what this is a way of trying to understand what the different types of social enterprise are. And so it's not a perfect model, but It's what we see as, and this came from Social Traders Australia, and what they've been seeing as the kind of general formats that social enterprises deliver their impact. The first one being employment and training, which means things like Te Whangai Trust, where people that have barriers to employment are given training and employment and prepared for the workforce. And I was reading something the other day of all the social enterprises in Scotland, 44% of them are employment and training. And the reason for that is that there is a whole lot of need out there, and also it's an incredibly impactful thing to do. If you can take someone who had barriers to work and allow them to have a productive career, you create incredible benefit and defray incredible cost to the community in terms of, people might be falling into substance abuse or criminal justice system or, whatever that might be, and you create a stable environment for the community. And so lots and lots of them. The second one we're calling equitable access to products and services. So these are social enterprises, a bit of a catch-all category, but these are social enterprises for whom the impact that they have is delivered via the products or services that they create. And so we'll have a look in a minute at what some of those might be. But yeah, it's really the impact is tied up in the product or service. And then the third one is income generators, and they're the easiest ones to understand because they're basically about leveraging an asset to create income and then using that income to pay for the impact that the organization wants to have. And they can do that either internally, where they're generating the income to pay for themselves to be delivering the impact, or it might be that they're just generating income to pass on to another organization to deliver the impact. So we see both.
Roy, when we talk about these three buckets in the workshops and with other people, we usually get questions around what happens if I want to cover more than one bucket? What are the implications of doing that? Or should I focus on just one of them? Or can I go and try to cover the three of them? Or what
really
would you
good
say?
question. Yeah, really good question, because invariably we try and do everything because more is better, right? And we do see examples of social enterprises that operate across more than one of these buckets. But what we'd suggest is that you want to find out what's the thing that matters most and the thing that you're going to really double down on succeeding with, and doing just that. So for example, if you're doing employment and training, you want to develop real expertise around that and refine your model so you can do that as best as you possibly can. And if you're busy trying to deliver impact across other things, usually it's harder, and you do less of a good job of that one that you're trying to focus on. And it's not to say you can't do it, but there might come a time in your social enterprise where you have to drop one of them. And so you need to know which one you might drop, which one you'd be prepared to drop, and which one's non-negotiable, and the reason for being there.
Yeah.
Cool. So if we just whip back through, so Embrace, what kind of social enterprise do you think Embrace would be?
Use the chat for that. I think there might be a little bit of a delay with the chat, but just send your thoughts through and we'll get them.
Maybe a bit of a delay. We'll move on anyway. But so Embrace is really a product or service social enterprise. So it's the product, it's the incubator that's really delivering the impact, and the model is just about how do we internally fund the ability to deliver that impact. Te Whangai Trust, pretty obviously about employment and training, and Red Cross, pretty obviously about income generation. The sort of point of it there, and it may have some other benefits. There may be some community benefits that they have. There may be the giving people access to good quality clothing and things like that. But my hunch would be that income is the main thing, and that's the thing that they would attempt to maximize because it's allowing them to deliver their main impact elsewhere. Okay, so we'll have a look at what a social enterprise needs.
Hold on, Ron. We have a question from Manny. With Embrace, why be owned by a charitable trust for distribution of profits?
Right, so why would it be owned by a charitable trust? The main reason for this would be around how you protect the mission. So you could create a for-profit company to trade, and that company could be really profitable, but you then run the risk that it gets taken off course, because who gets the profits? Whoever owns it. So quite often what we see, and it's referred to as a hybrid structure, that you'll have a commercial, in New Zealand, a limited liability company that has lots of flexibility, limits the liability of the owners, can be set up for $150 and kind of gives you a really fast way of starting and being able to trade, but then is owned by a charitable trust. And so that then protects the mission, because the charitable trust is always going to direct the company as the sole shareholder to do the things that are in the mission of the charity. So it's that kind of hybrid structure of mission protection. So the mission protection of ownership by the charity, but then the flexibility of the limited liability company to be able to move quickly, and also, if it failed, not bring down the charity as a result of of that, because the assets, the liability is limited to the assets of the limited liability company.
Right.
Cool. Okay, so looking at what a social enterprise needs, and this is a sort of framework that a really simple framework that we're going to work through today to really understand what the key components of a social enterprise are. And so the first one being purpose. And so the purpose is really, well, what the slide says, which is it concisely states what why your social enterprise exists. What is the reason you are doing this? And so the purpose is really the touchstone that everyone who is founding this social enterprise comes back to as their reason for doing it. And we'll talk a bit more later on about how we would define that and how we would come up with a purpose. But it is that really simple statement that explains why you get up in the morning to do this.
What happens, Roy, we've worked with people and we've seen it happening so many times where different founders of the social enterprise think they agree on the purpose from the beginning, but then at some point they realize that actually what makes one person wake up and go to work every morning is not the same thing that makes the other person drive the project. So how would you recommend people to deal with that from the beginning so it doesn't affect the growth of the organization later on?
Absolutely, and it's crucial. I'm involved in running Startup Weekend throughout New Zealand, and one of the things that we see at Startup Weekend is that basically it's a group of strangers who've come together to start a company in 54 hours. So you've got maybe 100 entrepreneurs who form into teams to try and build companies, and we do it with social enterprise as well. And one of the things we find is that there are teams that understand kind of what they're there to do right from the start, and they make really good progress. And there are teams that perhaps disagree on what the real underlying purpose is, but they're playing nice and no one wants to call it out. And so they kind of fudge it and have a very broad purpose, or, kind of have one of those purpose statements that you've seen that kind of includes everyone's perspective that's all slightly different from each other. And what we see is with social enterprise is that if you don't get that clarity right up front, you end up in a situation where you're going to have to make a compromise at some point.
Yeah.
And that compromise can tear the organization apart, because, you thought we were there to build a language learning center, and I thought we were there to support refugees via the language learning center. And we're at this point where, where it's not working, and you're like, well, I'm building a language learning center and I'm supporting refugees, and we're kind of in this situation where we can't recover from. And so what we definitely suggest is you get that clarity right at the start, and coming up with a really clear purpose is a good way of doing that.
And a way of doing that and clarifying that from the beginning would be to use the why questions and keep exploring. Why are we doing this? Why is that important?
Yeah.
Why is it making a change? Why is it having an impact in the world? Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. And we're going to talk about why a little later on, but that there's a process in Lean Startup that we refer to as the 5 whys. And it's just about asking why and going deeper. And invariably, we start with what and how. So we say, what's your purpose? And they'll say, well, we're building this thing. And this is how it's making a difference. And asking 5 whys is when you say, okay, so why does that matter? And why is that important? And just digging deeper and deeper until you get to that thing that everybody agrees on that is fundamental, which is why you do this. Not what you're doing, not how you're doing it, because that could all change, but the purpose doesn't change. It's the thing that, that will carry you through all the dark times.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so business models. So I wonder how many of you out there are kind of confident that you know what a business model is and how it works. Usually when we do this in a workshop, you sort of get, half a dozen hands go up, and then when people realize I'm going to ask to explain what a business model is, all the hands go down. And so business models are one of those things that have been made very complex and opaque by high-priced consultants wanting to charge you a lot of money to explain things. I've got a really simple definition of a business model, which helps us understand the fundamentals. And I think that just having this understanding of a business model sets you free to be able to develop your ideas and test them and take them forward without feeling like you need to rely on some high-priced, high-experienced person to come and do the magical business model work. So the way I define a business model is it's a way to create, deliver, and capture value. So you've got to find a way of making value. You've got to find a way of getting it to people, and you've got to find a way of capturing some of that value for yourself. And the example I would give is in an alternate reality, I was a really good singer. And so I can sing in the shower and make a really good song. And maybe that's good enough, that you'd say I'm creating value, creating a song that other people would want to hear and would really enjoy hearing. So I've created some value. I don't yet have a business model, but I've got a way of creating value. So maybe I figure out a way of delivering value via YouTube. So I make a video of myself, preferably not in the shower, and I deliver it via YouTube. And so lots of people get to see it. So I've got my way of creating and delivering value, but I don't yet have a business model. I can't sustainably do that. I can't spend all of my my working time doing that because I'll need to pay my bills somehow. So if I wanted to do it sustainably, I've got to find a way of capturing value. And so YouTube makes that pretty easy by putting ads on your videos, and then you get to capture 5 or 10 cents of the ad revenue that comes through every time someone watches your video. So if I've got my song, my way of creating value, I've got posting it up on YouTube as a way of delivering value, and then I've got advertisements as a way of capturing that value, then I've got a business model. I've got something that can actually sustain me over time.
And keep singing in the shower.
Yeah. I just want to make it clear. I do not have a good singing voice. Don't ever expect me to sing if you meet me.
I won't ask you that.
Okay, so if we look really quickly at an example, so Hannah's, which is an iconic New Zealand shoe store. So if we understand their business model, they design, manufacture, market, distribute shoes. So for Anna here, they're providing her with shoes, and she's providing them with money. And that's how the business model works. They create the value in the form of the shoe, they deliver the value in the form of the store, and they capture the value in the form of Anna paying for the shoe. And if it's a good business model, there'll be more money. She'll pay more money for the shoe than it costs for them to design, manufacture, and market, deliver. And there'll be some sort of profitable, sustainable business model there. Social enterprise business models can be a little more complex. So if we look at the Red Cross store, if we've got on the left-hand side donations of clothing from people who have spare clothing, also donations of cash sometimes. On the other side, you've got purchases of clothing by people who are looking for a good deal, and the cash that they're giving to the Red Cross for the clothing. And then the profit that comes out of all of that becomes the funding for the impact. So that becomes the funding for the rest of the Red Cross's operations. So a little more complex, but still relatively simple. So that's the fundamentals of business models and how they work. And with any luck, that will give you a bit more ability to actually sit down and go, okay, I've got an idea, what might the business model be? So impact models, if you remember that we've got to have a purpose, you've got to have a business model, and you've got to have an impact model to be a social enterprise. The impact model we describe as the logic that explains how your activities will deliver a long-term impact on the problem you're addressing. And so what we're interested in with social enterprise is a long-term impact. It's relatively easy to create short-term outcomes, but we're interested in what actually changes over time. And so that's the point of an impact model. And you can make these as complex as you like, depending on who needs to see them. If you've got, certain customers, be they government or big organizations, might want to see a whole lot of complexity in the impact model. Or your social enterprise might not rely on anyone actually supporting your impact model, and therefore you just need an impact model that's good enough to satisfy you that what you're doing is making a difference. And so a really simple version that we have is these 4 boxes. So who has what problem? So this relates to the purpose. What is it in the world that you're fed up with and that you need to change? What is it that's just so unfair that you can't handle it happening any longer and you're prepared to do something about it? So who's got that problem? The activity, what are you doing about it? What's going to happen? Are they going to come into your program? Are they going to receive your product? Are they going to, what is it that is actually going to happen as a result of your social enterprise? And then outputs and outcomes. What changes immediately as a result? Do they get more confident? Do they learn a new skill? Do they have a warmer home? Does a river, become cleaner and more sustainable? What is that immediate outcome? And then finally, impact, which is what changes eventually. How does society look in 10 years' time when you've been solving this problem or working on solving this problem? What actually changes? So if you were to clean up a river and then next year it would just be polluted again, that's not long-term impact. It means that you're getting an outcome, which is the river's cleaning up, but actually in terms of long-term impact, you might think, well, is it actually worth doing it if we can't sustain that, if it's just going to get all ruined again? And so that's with social enterprise, what we have to challenge ourselves with is what is that long-term impact? What makes a difference? What are we making a difference to over time? And in terms of how we build that, part of it is validation. So once we've sketched out what it is, part of it is testing that these things will actually happen, that the person will attend the program and that the outcomes will actually happen. The stream will get cleaned up. The person will get more confidence. They will learn a new skill, whatever that might be. And the other part is based on research, because lots of people have already done a whole bunch of research into this kind of stuff. If you're doing programs in schools, there's lots of research that you can use to bolster your impact model that suggests things like if people, if young people at risk have better attendance at school, then it's likely to result in X decrease in their risk of being incarcerated, something like that. So you can rest on research to flesh out that impact model, but ultimately you need confidence that it's actually going to happen, that problem is real, that people are going to do the things you need them to do for your social enterprise to work, that those outcomes are actually going to occur, and that over time you'll have the impact that your purpose is asking for. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes to go. So wrapping that up, purpose plus business model plus impact gives us our social enterprise business model. So that's our model. What's our North Star? Why are we here? What's our business model that's going to make it run? And then how are we delivering that change? We won't take a break because we've only got 15 minutes to go. So where to start? Let's have a think about how we might start a social enterprise. So we talked a little bit before about finding your why. And Simon Sinek has a great TED talk called Start With Why, and a book as well. And it's really about how you get beneath the what and the how to why does this matter. And this is what's important about what you're doing. So you can get people interested in the thing that you're building or the way that you're doing something, but actually what really gets people interested is why you're doing it. And so getting to that purpose, that really clear why, is what matters. So if, you know, someone came up to me and said, I'm building a language learning center for new immigrants to New Zealand. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds okay. But if they came up to me and said, you know, 50% of new migrants in New Zealand suffer from depression. I'm making this up, by the way. You know, and 50% of children of new migrants are underperforming in school, and you know, and I'm sick of it, and I'm not going to stand for it any longer. Then you've really got me. Like, I understand why this matters. I understand why it's important. And if I'm passionate about that as well, then I'll get on board with you and contribute to what you're trying to do. But if you're just telling me the what and the how, yeah, it's nice and everything, but the why is what actually inspires us. So getting to that to start with, and really understanding that purpose. And as a way of understanding that, how purpose would influence how your social enterprise would actually take form and what the options are. I'll just whip us through a few examples of community cafes, because it's one that quite often comes up as a social enterprise that community groups want to do. So the first one is Paper Cup, which is in London, and their goal is to provide a space and support for addiction services. So people that are working with addiction and attending groups and support groups around addiction. And so it's a relatively nice high-end cafe where people will come in and buy their nice, expensive coffee. But at the same time, in the cafe, there might be an addiction support group happening that's getting free coffee and free food and a beautiful environment to be in. And so that's their use of the community cafe to provide that support. Another one is Merge Cafe in Auckland, which comes out of LifeWise. And so this cafe is, it's focused around the issue of homelessness. And so it's staffed by people that have experienced homelessness. It provides discounted food, something like $4 for a lunch for people that are struggling to afford good food. If you have more money, then you're kind of encouraged to pay more. And then any profits are sort of going to support LifeWise and work with homelessness. And so they're one that sort of ticks all three boxes, all three buckets, but that's fairly unusual. But you can see, you know, really delivering different value from the whole community cafe idea. And the final one is Cafe Agora in Hamilton. And so they have a charity every month that they're supporting, and 50 cents from every cup of coffee goes to supporting the charity of the month. And they're also committed to buying all their coffee beans from a charity in Thailand that's supporting former sex workers. And so again, delivering on a different purpose with something that kind of looks pretty similar. And then if we remind ourselves of the three buckets of social enterprise, helps us understand how we might take that one idea, community cafe, and then employ different setup and a different way of doing things to deliver our income. Our impact. Cool. Okay, so some work to do for you if you're thinking about starting a social enterprise. So one is, firstly, figure out what your purpose is. Figure out what's that fundamental thing that you really want to change in the world, that you're just not prepared to just keep going and let happen. That deep why that sits underneath everything. And so there's a stripped down social canvas social enterprise canvas that we'll be sharing at the end. And it's got a box at the top which says purpose. And it's deliberately small because your purpose should be really tight, sharp, punchy, clear, powerful, all of those good things, not a great litany of everyone's ideas all on one page. Once you've got a purpose, you want to think about ideas. So you may already have an idea for a social enterprise, but quite often people, and especially nonprofits, are kind of like, well, we want to do social enterprise, but what are our ideas? And so we'll obviously share this presentation with you, so I'll whip through them relatively quickly. But quickly, research proven models first. You know, if you're trying to solve a big entrenched social or environmental issue, at least 100 other people globally have already done it in a similar way to what you're thinking. So find out what everyone else has done, learn from them, learn from all the knockbacks that they've had and all the things that haven't worked, and gather all the things that you think might work. Number two, identify and leverage your strengths and assets. Often we go and do something that's completely unrelated to things we're good at, and we've got a much smaller chance of succeeding if we don't have strengths or assets in that area. So it might be your career, your skill sets. If you're an organization, it might be, you know, members that you already have or facilities or whatever it is, but feed that into your process. Look beyond the immediate, so spot future trends. Wayne Gretzky, the greatest ice hockey player of all time, has this great quote where they said, you know, how do you manage to always be in the right place at the right time? And he said, well, I skate to where the puck is going. So everyone else is chasing the puck and he's just figuring out where it's going to go and turning up. And we don't want to be chasing after everything. With social enterprise, we want to be figuring out where things are going and being ready for that when it happens, which is just a very different mindset, especially if we're from a not-for-profit background. So consider partnerships and joint ventures. We talked a little bit about that before. Consider the three types of social enterprise. So, you know, what are the different ways you can deliver that impact? Brainstorm needs and opportunities. You know, actually get together and say, what are the needs out there? What are the opportunities? And, you know, no dumb ideas. Collect together as many ideas as possible. Access other people's creativity. Find people that are in the space. Find people that are not in the space. Pull together all of those ideas. And involve your stakeholders. You know, crucially, what are they seeing? What are they interested in? What might they engage with? And out of that, the sort of body of that is helping you narrow down what you're doing. You know, narrow down the field of potential ideas so you've got something you can work with. Because it's pretty daunting to just go, well, we could do anything. What are we going to do? But, you know, once you start narrowing down around what other people have already done, around what assets and strengths we've got, around what's emerging, you know, you start to narrow things down and start to get to something good. Hold your ideas lightly. And we're going to talk about a little bit about lean startup. So this is a crucial thing. We tend to have one idea and it has to work, and we struggle when it doesn't. And so we just push it through. In the startup scene in New Zealand, we sort of sadly but laughingly refer to the 8-year startup. And that's the person who had an idea, it wasn't quite right, but they have been going for 8 years trying to make it work. And they're so psychologically invested in the idea that, you know, they've sort of built their life around this thing, and you could have told them in the first month it wasn't going to work, but they're now stuck with it. So hold them lightly so you can be flexible. And lean startup really allows this to be possible. So lean startup is the methodology that's been developed in the last 7 or 8 years around startup companies. And fundamentally what it's saying is a startup isn't a small version of a big company. A big company executes on a known business model. Startup searches for a scalable, repeatable business model. And that's a pretty deep insight that bears some thinking about. And what it's basically saying is the job of a startup is to learn what the model should be. And when you know what the model should be, then you're a company and you execute it. And it's the same for a social enterprise. You know, what should you be doing? That's the job. When you know what you should be doing, then you execute it. So the idea is you start by sketching your whole social enterprise idea, if you've got one. And there's the cut down canvas that I showed you before. If you want to sort of get into a bit more of the fundamentals of the business model piece, there's the social lean canvas as well, which still has that purpose and impact, but fleshes out the business model components a bit more. So start by sketching that whole social enterprise business model. Figure out what you might be wrong and right about. And it's usually the customers that you're wrong and right about. Prioritize these risks you know, the things that you might be wrong about, and run experiments to figure out whether you're right or wrong. And this usually involves going out and talking with your customers before you've built anything. Change direction, adapt your business model when you find new information, quit if it doesn't work. You know, if you know it's not going to work, just get out and start something new. It's better than flogging a dead horse. But you want to be changing direction so that you get to something that's really good.
Well, what do you mean that when you say that usually what you get wrong is your customers?
Well, usually we just assume that the customer's going to want what we've got to sell.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Yeah, and so we've got, and this is the way we all used to build businesses, you know, for 100 years or more. You get a bunch of capital, you build the thing, and then you release it to customers, and you just cross your fingers that they'll want it.
And how could you minimize that risk of building something that is not what the customer really wants?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, fundamentally, it's, does the customer have a problem I can solve for them that they'll pay for? You know, if you're trying to get the business model piece to work.
Right. So it's about identifying the problem first and then seeing what can we design in order to solve that problem.
Absolutely. Oh. And you may already have the idea for what you're going to design, but the design assumes that the customer has a problem, will pay for a solution, will engage with a solution. Yeah. And if you go out and talk to the customer and you go, so how are you currently solving this? And it's like, well, I don't really do anything about it. It's a problem, yeah, but at the moment I'm just letting it slide.
Yeah, it's not a priority. Or
it's like, well, yeah, are they actually going to pay for a solution, or you know?
So this is about having conversations with your customers, hey?
Absolutely, yeah. And the idea being that you learn that stuff early and cheaply, and change direction early, rather than getting a year in and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then kind of go, oh, it doesn't quite work like we thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so next steps. If you're wanting to start a social enterprise, or even if you're retrofitting this to a social enterprise, it's define that purpose, get really clear about it. It becomes the talisman that holds the whole thing together. Generate an idea that's worth testing. So don't just go out and talk to customers about any rubbish idea.
Yeah.
You know, it needs to be good enough to be worth your time to go and talk to the customers. So get something that once you get it on a canvas, you can look at it and go, actually, that looks pretty good. If we're right about it, that's worth doing. So you go out and you know, go out and test it once you know that it's worth testing. Do that with real customers. Do it with the real people, not just your mates. You can start with your mates, but end of the day, it's going to have to be the real customers. Hold your ideas lightly. Be ready for them to change, because that's where the goodness is. It changes to something better. Be resilient, because there's always going to be lots and lots of obstacles.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the job of being a social entrepreneur, is the obstacles. You know, the obstacles aren't in the way of you getting it done. You know, they're not in the way of the work, they are the work.
Yeah.
Otherwise, everyone would do this. And finally, be inventive. Create something that's magical. We don't want to, you know, so often we just kind of copy some boring model because that's just what's there. But we want to be creating something that's magical. We want to be creating something that actually makes people light up when they hear about it. And the way to do that is to really learn from your customers. Learn those little insights, those things that no one's really picked up before, that you can then craft into a business model that can do something really incredible. And there's some follow-up resources. So obviously this webinar is just a starting point. So yeah, grab this. We'll send this out to you. And there's a bunch of resources there around thinking about lean startup, around idea generation, the social in canvas. There's Unlimited's social entrepreneurship toolkit. You know, there's a whole bunch there that you can get stuck into to kind of flesh out your understanding of how to do the starting bit of a social enterprise.
Great, just like that one.
Yeah, and where can you get support from? So the Akina Foundation's got a bunch of support. So there's a workshop program, which is, these are the current workshops. Some of these are available in webinar form, and more will be over time. So have a look on the website for those, for dates and locations. Elevate programs kicking off next year for established social enterprises. We've got advisory services, which is consulting services for bigger organizations around social enterprise. Business Mentors New Zealand can be a great resource. Startup Weekend, if you want to get that kind of, you know, weekend long intensive experience of starting something. Yeah, so go check out those resources. So we're right on time.
We are, to the minute.
So just before we go, we'd love to get a feedback form filled out. So is it Vincent or is it?
So, yeah, we would really appreciate you taking a couple of minutes to fill this up, because it really helps us designing more webinars, seeing what you guys need, what people want, and knowing how we do as well, and improving what we do and how we do it. And so I'm sending you the link through the chat and also through the questions and topics section on the webinar platform. So yeah, it won't take long. We would really, really appreciate if you can fill it up, and so we can design more webinars from now on.
Awesome, thanks team.
And then we will send you an email with the link to the webinar that so you can listen to it again, or you can share it with your team or with friends or with anyone that could be interested in this, and with some resources as well, all the resources that we've mentioned today, and some extra information. It's been great to see you, all of you, engaging in the chat and just throwing questions and comments and even additional information that you've seen around. So we will include all that on the email. And thank you so much for being here. So anything else from you?
Yeah, no, thank you all.
Cool.
Yeah, so get in touch if you want to chat. And yeah, we'll see you around the Startup Weekend ecosystem. Sorry, the social enterprise ecosystem. Startup Weekend on the brain. Yeah, so we'll hopefully see you in a community near you sometime soon. So yeah, make sure you let us know where you are so we get a sense of where the interest is, and where we can go to engage with folks like you that are interested in social enterprise. Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
We'll see you again soon.